Northwest Now is supported, in part, by viewers like you. Thank you.
A boat, above all other inanimate things, is personified in a man's mind. Man, building this greatest and most personal of all tools, has in turn received a boat-shaped mind, and the boat, a man-shaped soul. A man builds the best of himself into a boat, builds many of the unconscious memories of his ancestors. And I think that was true definitely of my grandfather in that sense of building the best of yourself into a boat.
The boat Claire Petrich's grandfather built was the Western Flyer. And in the spring of 1940, author John Steinbeck and his best friend, marine biologist Ed Ricketts, chartered it for a 6-week cruise to the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. They perhaps never realized their journey and the boat that took them on it would become the stuff of legend, popularizing the still relatively obscure study of the natural ecology.
They wanted to get down to the Sea of Cortez and take a look at things. They knew environmental change was happening. We didn't call it global warming. We didn't call it environmental change. They knew things were happening. There were things going to be different. What they did was they went down and they kind of made a line in the sand, and they said, this is the environment as of today.
I think that's what Steinbeck and Ricketts were doing at that time. They were beginning kind of a definition of what ecology really means for all of us, and I think that's definitely now a common accepted understanding of the way the web of the world exists.
Today, what's left of the Western Flyer sits in the shop at the Port Townsend Shipwrights Co-op. Only recently did the work begin to restore her.
You know, the boat kind of ended up here by fate, but the fate has brought it to the right place. This boat could have been towed to Bellingham. They probably could have done the project. Could have been towed to Seattle. They would have done the project. But the boat ended up in Port Townsend, Washington. And Port Townsend, with its rich history of wooden boats and its resurgence since the early 1970s with the trade school here in town and a lot of small wooden boat shops popping up, the skills really exist here. There's hundreds of people in this community that can actively work on a wooden boat. So landing in a place like this with the art and the skills and the technology to do it is just perfect for this project.
80 years after the Western Flyer was built in Tacoma, Pete Rust and Paul Stoffer are shaping the boat's new clamp and shelf timbers on the same bandsaw that used to be in the shop at the Western Boat Building Company. A fitting coincidence in a project that requires the craftsmen here to document, pattern, and cut replacement parts one at a time to preserve the boat's original character.
The challenge is basically figuring out how to start putting pieces back together without the rest of it falling apart in the meantime. So, what we're doing now is kind of very delicately, recreating some important structural pieces without losing the original shape of the boat. Most of the times when we're repairing a boat, we're kind of more replacing a couple aspects of the structure and not necessarily the whole package. So we're kind of building it the hard way.
And it's coming apart the hard way too. That's Tim Lee's job, toiling for hours with a Sawzall, playing a game of Jenga with history.
We could wreck it pretty quickly, but we're trying to restore the boat. So the only reference we have to the shape of the boat is the boat itself. And so we have to develop an approach that takes out structural members and puts structural members back in that allows us to basically replicate what was there. Especially when you're working from one section to the other section of the boat, like from the side of the boat and the turn of the bilge to the stern. All of those, what's called the lines of the boat, all have to flow together. So if you just take big chunks of it out, then you're guessing what was there before.
She's now on life support, But there was a time when the Western Flyer was the queen of the Monterey fishing fleet and a daily supplier to the fish packers on Cannery Row. Tacoma's Petrich family founded the company that built the Western Flyer, and if you look carefully under the Murray Morgan Bridge, you can still find the Petrich name, and chances are you'll find Claire Petrich, working in the office of the Petrich Marine Dock, ready to share a story, like the one about the time her grandfather Martin and future partner Joe Martinac visited a friend to see if boat building was a viable business idea.
So Joe and Martin took a ferry boat over to Gig Harbor. They wanted to see what was going on with their friends, the Skansies, another group of Croatians who were building boats. And when they came back from Gig Harbor, they saw that there was a lot of business and that there was an opportunity for them to begin building boats together. So they found a third partner who was a shipwright, and the three of them opened up Western Boat Building Company in December of 1916.
21 years later, in 1937, the 77-foot-long Western Flyer would be launched, off to exploit Monterey's storied sardine fishery that would crash less than a decade later. And that was the Flyer's story. Decades of exploiting dwindling populations of sardine, perch, salmon, and crab, and on the other hand, numerous charters exploring and documenting the destruction for government and industry researchers. Its first research voyage, however, was its most famous. Steinbeck vowing he was done with writing fiction after being lauded, but also vilified for the harsh look at capitalism contained in The Grapes of Wrath. And Ed Ricketts, with his model good looks and relationship trouble with a married woman, both ready to get out of town.
You know, there were two guys that went on this trip, two buddies. They had that connection, that friendship. Ed Ricketts was a dropout from the University of Chicago, moved to Monterey, and just started turning over rocks, getting down in the tide pools, exploring the tide pools, exploring the intertidal, the tidal, and the shoreline, and started to make these connections, started to see that the ocean and the environment all worked as one large organism. And someone needed to tell his story. He met John Steinbeck in the early 1930s. They became good friends, and that experience, that relationship grew. And would Ed Ricketts be as famous? No. John Steinbeck is the key, that connection, that art. We keep bringing it back to art. I was told by the director of the Steinbeck Institute in Salinas that every great scientist needs a great author to follow them around and narrate their life. And that's what Steinbeck was to Ricketts. But Ricketts is the hero.
Ricketts' careful documentation of species and conditions in the Gulf prior to the erection of the Hoover Dam provided the biology, but the fame came with Steinbeck's artful blend of science and philosophy in the Sea of Cortez, his only literary collaboration, and a book credited with pulling generations of students into marine biology.
So, of course, Steinbeck's connection is everything. He documented the trip, he documented the adventure, he documented the science in several books, and then went on to write a career of novels that were based a lot on this trip. And Ed Ricketts, his best friend and partner in crime, their adventures. Would people be drawn to this project if Steinbeck wasn't there? No. Not because Steinbeck, because no one would have told the story of the Sea of Cortez and their trip and journey and adventures.
It would take a while for the book to reach a mass audience, but as for the Western Flyer, it spent decades fishing the Pacific, fading into obscurity, and falling into disrepair. By the time rough-cut wood makes its way to this shop to be milled on machines made decades ago, one of the biggest challenges associated with the restoration of the Western Flyer has been tackled: finding the pristine logs needed to form the boat structure. Sourcing the wood has been an enormous, time-consuming task. A lot of the fir being used in this early work is locally sourced, but other pieces, including oak for the frames, involves trips back east to identify the trees and hire the sawyers capable of delivering clear, straight timbers. And this work takes a lot of physical effort too, so even after the timbers are milled down a bit, making long cuts on big wood isn't so much of a technical challenge as it is a daily test of strength.
It's really more just a lot of work. It's just heavy. And so you're huffing it up onto the saw and pushing it in a nice clean line, you know, is key. So there'll probably be 3 of us just to kind of get, somebody will kind of be ultimately driving, and then the other 2 people will be kind of tailing that person and helping them keep it steered the right direction.
Steering the restoration in the right direction is made easier by the fact that while the boat is badly deteriorated, it is true to itself and very original. So in this case, the lack of investment in terms of remodeling or upgrading equipment over the years actually helps.
Nothing ever got changed. You're looking at a very complete 1930, 1940 fishing boat. No benches changed, no tables have been changed, no microwaves have been cut in. Very, very authentic project. I had the crew build this carriage underneath. It's this ladder frame.
People who make the trip to Port Townsend to see the flyer often ask why the boat is being saved. The answer to that question is simple considering the history.
The other really big question people ask me is, what part are you going to save? You know, we look at the boat as it sits today, and as you move around the boat, you see a lot of deterioration. And it's a great question. And unfortunately, old age has gotten to this girl, and we're going to look at about 60% going away. About 40% will stay. It's a lot of the forward 40% of the boat. It's the house, the forward deck, the forward part of the boat. Most fish boats get their primary deterioration from the wheelhouse aft. It's neglected back there. So answer to the question is really about 60% goes away, unfortunately. But at this point, I've been saving every piece that comes off the boat. There's a gentleman in California making surfboards out of some of the chunks. We've made name plaques. You know, it's part of history. We'll save it.
And there's another question of history slowly being answered, and that's the question of original quality. Yes, the boat is famous, but was it a good boat? And that's the question I posed to the man in the best position to answer it. The guy tearing her apart, and who spent 13 years teaching wooden boat building before joining the co-op.
And even though right now it doesn't look like much, but the materials that it was built, like this beam shelf, for example, which runs from here all the way up to what's called the break timber, where the deck steps up, was one 40-foot long piece of wood that was 10 inches wide and almost 4 inches thick, right? So it was a beautiful, clear piece, not a, maybe 1 or 2 knots in it. So yeah, the materials, the workmanship, everything we're finding, still tight joints. It was well built. The Western Boat Building Company was, a top-notch company.
The Western Flyer was lost and found several times over the years. Marine geophysicist Mike Williams found her once, and in 2000 tried to put together a 60-year anniversary sailing to the Sea of Cortez with Steinbeck's grandson.
We got all excited, and it became kind of a passion, but the funding wasn't there, and it kind of went away.
But with every purchase or restoration scheme that came and went, one thing stayed constant: the influence of Steinbeck's book.
I read it in high school and just have kept reading it every 5 to 10 years since, and it just resonates. It's one of those books like Walden that just, every time you read it, you get more things from it.
In one of the Flyer's darker chapters, a California developer bought her to decorate a restaurant. But much to the relief of preservationists and science and literature fans like Kevin Bailey, those plans fell through. Bailey is a retired NOAA and UW fisheries biologist who wrote the book on the Western Flyer. When he finally found the Flyer after the failed restaurant scheme, it had been renamed and left to rot in the Swinomish Channel under the Berenson Bridge near Anacortes, where it sank twice. It turns out the second sinking in the Swinomish was actually the boat's fourth sinking.
And this time, the boat sat on the bottom for 6 months, and they ran a belt underneath the boat, and they tugged on this boat. It seemed to be stuck in the mud, and it was almost like pulling your boot out of a mud in the tide flat. And finally it came loose and rose up. They pulled it up to the surface, and there was water pouring out of the portholes and had mud. It had this seaweed attached to it that when it dried out, it looked like white hair. And people who saw it at that point said it looked like a ghost ship.
The wreck was floated and slowly towed to Port Townsend to be stored on land, its future unknown. But word started leaking out and the pilgrims started arriving.
When I visited Port Townsend and saw the boat, the first time I saw it, it was outside. They hadn't started work on it yet, hadn't even cleaned it off. But people told me that there had been a stream of visitors to the boat. It was almost, something was drawing people to it. And somebody had pinned a picture of John Steinbeck to the hull. And I had the feeling it was almost like a casket in a wake for Steinbeck and Ricketts and the memory of the voyage to the Sea of Cortez.
The Western Flyer spent years on land, but finally a history-minded geologist from California who'd been looking for the Flyer found it. He bought the wreck for $1 million, acknowledging the boat was worthless yet priceless. His name is John Gregg, and like so many others, he was deeply influenced by the Sea of Cortez and Steinbeck's follow-up, The Log of the Sea of Cortez, which he got from the bookmobile as a child while living in rural Georgia.
And he grabbed that book off the shelf, and I think he told me he thought it was a pirate story. But he read that story at 13 years old, and it bit him hard. And it shaped a lot of the way he looked at the Earth. The Sea of Cortez book, The Log of the Sea of Cortez, is a philosophy book. It's a science book. It's an adventure book. It's a way of looking at the Earth. It's pertinent in 1940 as it is today. It can be republished today. It isn't published today, and be something that everyone would want to read and enjoy. So it started as a one-man passion project. He bought the boat in 2015 after searching for it for a while. A couple of people helped open those doors and find the boat for him. And he came to town, found the boat, bought the boat, didn't really know what he was going to do with the boat.
So the thinking began, and it became clear very quickly there was a lot of interest in the boat for a wide variety of reasons.
I quickly realized early on in the project, the boat was brought in to the space that it's in now in May of 2015. And within days, people would be stopping by. People would have heard it on the news, a little snippet, kind of the underground. Come take a look at the Western Flyer. And people would stop by. They'd poke their head in the door. So we kind of expanded on that. We built a little bit of a interpretive museum space. People could self-guided look at the boat. And it's been amazing to see the activity. It can be between 10 to 30 people a week stop by to just take a glimpse, maybe a revisit to the project, interact with it. It really means a lot to a lot of people.
Eventually, the vision came clear, not to make a memorial to a time gone by, but rather to recreate the Flyer as an important part of understanding the oceans today. The Western Flyer is going to return to the sea as a high-tech research vessel, but built for students.
It plays into the theme of the Western Flyer having this kind of dualistic nature of both exploring and exploiting the sea, and also has to do with this idea of the mortality and immortality of the boat, the immortality being the iconic boat that John Steinbeck created, and the mortal sense of the boat, which is the wreckage of the boat that we saw a few years ago.
The educational component of this is the biggest component. It's about allowing young people from kindergarten to undergraduate level to expose them to their direct marine environment. The STEM is the big buzzword now in education. We want to bring art back into it. We want to do STEAM. We're gifted with this project that comes with a literary giant, John Steinbeck. If we can expose young people, again, to their marine environment, and then bring the artistic side in. You know, the story is about two men leaving on a journey to the Sea of Cortez. One was a scientist and one was an artist. And that connection that the two of them had, and then exploring the connection of humans to the environment and the environment to itself.
But it will not come cheap. The boat cost $1 million, the restoration another $2 million, and then there's the full build-out, with state-of-the-art navigation and sampling gear, a Nautilus-shaped undersea robot to deploy, and a science lab down where the old fish hold used to be.
And we're looking at another couple $1 million. By the time you get an ROV on this boat, the oceanographic reel, side sonar, all of the position holding equipment, it's a $5 million project to make this boat the research, education, historic envelope that we all envision.
I think there's been a lot more interest from the marine biology side than I really ever expected. I thought most of the draw from this, the appeal from this boat would be the Steinbeck side of it, but I think the Ricketts side of it is actually quite large. You know, it's kind of something new to me.
And I think that's a wonderful thing about it. I think it's great, shows absolutely superb vision. What we need are vessels that will take young people and elders out into the sea to see and understand what the fisheries and the whole circle of life is all about and the part that we play in it. And I'm thrilled that the Western Flyer is going to be a vehicle for that understanding for people of all ages.
And tying in global warming and ocean acidification and stimulating young people, high school, junior college, to get passionate about the ocean and how important it is, and to have a platform like this to get young people involved is just really exciting.
Another source of excitement is that the new Western Flyer will not only do research, it will also be a proving ground for a $500,000 state-of-the-art electric propulsion system, allowing 8 to 10-hour missions to run on battery power alone.
We do get asked this question a lot, you know, how does that fit with John Steinbeck or Ricketts? And the way it fits is that the whole journey to the Sea of Cortez was about science and naturalism, and it was about studying the species that hadn't been studied in their environment in an environmental way before. And it was groundbreaking, and this is also groundbreaking. This is a groundbreaking project, and you can go out there and do it without affecting the environment you're in.
So the Western Flyer will come full circle, from exploitation to exploration. Teachers will share lesson plans to study the sea, and the boat will support students all up and down the Pacific coast.
Right, imagine you've been living in Coos Bay, Oregon, and you've heard this story about this offshore volcano that's venting all the time. And so you get an opportunity, you're an 11th grader in school, and you've had an opportunity to study that offshore volcano for 6 months. And then this boat that's a state-of-the-art research platform. It's got dynamic position holding, it's got ROVs, it's got side sonar. You now get to interact with that volcano firsthand. You get to deploy that ROV, you get to send it down to 5,000 feet. You get to pick that object, that worm, that crustacean, that invertebrate that you've been looking at and studying firsthand. You get to bring that to the surface. It's an incredible experience. I mean, I have students that get excited, but I have adults that are like, when do I sign on? When do I get to be on this boat?
So as the excitement builds toward the Western Flyer's second christening, the work goes on, day by day, board by board, until a boat that once took from the sea is ready to give back.
And I can't wait, you know, like right now I step on it and every time I get on it I'm just covered in dirt, and I keep thinking one of these days I'm going to step inside the boat and it's going to just smell like dug fur and it's going to be clean, and you're going to go, the dirty, rotten part of it will just be a memory. We'll all be really proud of it and seeing it, and like seeing this boat go down to Monterey and kind of tie that history back together, and with the whole idea of it going out and teaching. I'm sure we'll be tired, I'm sure we'll be glad to see it go, but I'm sure we're all going to be totally in love with it.
I hope this program got you thinking and talking. To watch this program or to share it with others, you can find it on the Northwest Now page at kbtc.org. My last question was for Claire Petrich, and I asked her what her grandfather might have thought about the resurrection of the Western Flyer.
If I were him, I would say, yes, we built them right. Yes, people respected the boats. Yes, they're doing what they were intended to do. And so I think there's always an appreciation of the fact that a boat lives long beyond its maker, long beyond its first skippers, and is a vehicle for people into the future to enjoy and understand the water and nature in a way they can't do it if they are landlocked. So yes, I would say Martin Petrich would be very pleased to see his boats continue into the future.
KBTC Public Television is an active member of the community, spreading awareness, celebrating diversity, and illuminating the paths of social discourse and growth. Join the conversation. Email your comments and suggestions to northwestnow@kbtc.org. You can also submit your story ideas by clicking on the link at the bottom of the Northwest Now webpage at kbtc.org. KBTC can be found on Facebook by simply searching KBTC. Get inside information about upcoming programs, post your comments, and connect with other viewers and resources relating to our program's topics. Follow at KBTC TV on Twitter, where you can receive notifications about what we're working on right now, what to look for, and connect with other viewers and linking resources on the topics in which you're interested. KBTC is your public TV station, and we want to hear from you.